How are you all? Basically, did you eat all the donuts that have been sitting out in the sun for ages? Because if you did, toilets are over that way. So, yeah, although saying that, as we start talking about the future of work, depending on your boss, you just might not be allowed out. So have fun with that one. My name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute. Now, a lot of people call me a futurist. I kind of look at two futures. I look at the future, which I regard as the next 20 years. So that's where the vast majority of multinationals like to spend some of their time, at least, looking at the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years. Although, interestingly enough, since we have a global audience in Asia, they look 50 years out from a multinational perspective. So organizations like Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent, those kinds of guys. So there's actually quite an interesting cultural difference as we start looking across different countries. I also look at deep futures, which is the next 20 to 50 years out, because I work with all the sovereign governments, typically on the future of energy, transportation, financial services, tax, wealth, education and jobs, health, all that sort of stuff. And when we have a look at the system level changes that are coming through, as Ian mentioned a little bit earlier, we are fighting fires on many fronts. There's lots of things changing. And as both individuals, but also professionals, and as businesses and business leaders, it's sometimes difficult to really try to get across the levels of change that we are all being subjected to, even as we sit here. Now, as a futurist, I could sit here and say, there are hundreds of different technologies today that are already here that we are combining together to create next generation products and services. Whether it's payments, whether it's money, whether it's ACH networks, basically whether it's a smartphone, whether it's the semiconductors in your pockets and everything else. I could also say, you're also being subjected as businesses to hundreds of different megatrends. Climate change is one megatrend. Decentralized finance is another megatrend. All these kinds of things. Now, I typically think that me just sort of saying there are hundreds of technologies and hundreds of trends is very easy just to wash over you. So I put together a little video. So I like writing books, and rather than just showing you the front page of the books, I'm going to show you what's actually in them. Now, when you start seeing these, each slide or each page for each megatrend and each technology is up here for about 1/4 of a millisecond. This is what you're subjected to today. Virtual reality, 1/4 of a second. Climate change, 1/4 of a second. Artificial intelligence, 1/4 of a second. Blockchain, DLT, 1/4 of a second. So when we start talking about the future, possible futures and all these kinds of different things, basically there is a huge amount going on that we're trying to actually, on the one hand, just see. Secondly, understand, and then try to figure out what does that actually mean for us. Now, when we have a look just at the technologies, it's estimated that current emerging technologies will destroy over $50 trillion worth of GDP. Now, we're already seeing this in the oil and gas industry, for example. We're moving from traditional oil and gas-based economies to renewable economies. Now, when we start having a look at healthcare, we have a huge amount of value destruction there. When we have a look at transportation, we are moving from cars that we buy, that we drive, to cars that drive themselves, so that we buy as a service. So when we actually have a look at the amount of value destruction going on, it's staggering. But the upside of this is all of these different emerging technologies, and these span sort of 50 years, whether it's 5G, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth, robotics, etc. All of these different technologies, it's estimated, will create over $210 trillion of new opportunity. So the downside is that your existing businesses will be disrupted in some way. The upside is there's a huge amount of opportunity. And I'm not going to go through these because there's obviously a lot, but there's 180 emerging technologies just on this radar. And these are sort of in the books and bits and bobs. But when we start having a look at these, when we start talking about the future of work, so what you do, where you do it, how you do it, this is really what we're sort of trying to figure out. And ultimately, there are an infinite number of futures that we can talk about. Now, increasingly, when we have a look at the global stage, change is coming harder and faster than ever before. So from a business perspective and a personal perspective, it means that all of a sudden you have less time to see the new thing, understand the new thing, plan to counter or use the new thing, and then adapt your personal lives or your businesses. This is actually one of the biggest problems that CEOs of the vast majority of organizations have, because they say we are most fearful of emerging technology-led disruption and, frankly, the speed of change. But it's also more complex. As Ian kind of mentioned earlier, we have so many different trends and wildfires basically at our doors now. What do you focus on? Where do you spend the majority of your time? And that will come down to the line of business that you're in, the sector that you're in, the geography that you're in, and so on and so forth. So let's start simplifying things. Now, when we start having a look at futurist predictions, technologists have never really been that good at predicting the future. So Bill Gates, 640K ought to be enough memory for anybody, right? Yeah. Okay. When we have a look at IBM, maybe there's a world market for 5 computers. He was talking about mainframes at this point. And we won't even go into McKinsey, basically, who said there might be a global market for about 2 million smartphones. Okay? Now, when we start looking at politicians, we obviously think politicians are horrific at predicting the future. But, in 1965, the US Senate committee said in the year 2000, we will work 14 hours a week. All right? However, were they right or not, we'll see. Now, when we talk about current work, according to Gallup polls, this is predominantly Europe and the US, 66% of people don't like their jobs, 64% of employees aren't engaged. What the heck's that about? That's a bad figure for anyone. It's a bad figure for the employees, it's a bad figure basically for the companies that they work for. But the politicians were right, because surveys have also shown that on average, as people, we are only really productive for about 2 hours of a day. And this is also sort of starting to confound economists, because despite all these new technologies, global GDP is only really growing at about 2% per annum. It's literally a conundrum. They're going, so we have artificial intelligence, cloud-based services, digitization, and so on and so forth, so why isn't the overall economy, the global economy, irrespective of the countries, growing faster? So this has kind of led a number of people to start rethinking how we actually do work. Because why do you all work 5 days a week? Is it because hundreds of years ago somebody said, we start work on a Monday, we finish work on a Friday, unless of course you're in the Middle East? That's the reason why you work 5 days a week. What would happen if your bosses said to you, right, we're going to give you a task. The deadline for that task is whenever it is. Provided you get it done, we don't care how much you work, how often you work, or where you work from. So this has sort of led to these experiments, the 4-day week. Now, in Iceland, as well as the Nordics, and increasingly in the UK, these are actually showing a 30% uplift in employee productivity and about a 40% uplift in employee loyalty and happiness. The biggest challenge that we have with a 4-day week is how do you cram the things that you would traditionally do in a 5-day week, all those meetings and calls and Zoom calls and events, into 4 days? So should we really, when we're starting to set KPIs and everything else, should we actually be setting productivity as our main KPI, or the amount of time that you sit staring at a computer in an office while randomly walking around practicing the art of heuristics? Because the surveys are coming back that this is the way to go. Now, it's all very easy to talk about the future of work, but we should really also start talking about the companies that you work for, and this is the structure of the company that you work for, because this drives a lot. So, for example, 36% of millennials today are employed by the gig economy. When you go and have a conversation with younger generations and say, so do you think that you are going to have a full-time job for the next 50 years, irrespective of who it's with, the companies that you move around with, increasingly more of them going, no, you know what, I think I'll have a job with one company in the morning, a job with another company at midday, and a job with another company in the evening. So this kind of I don't work for one company any longer is becoming increasingly prevalent, and that was especially true during COVID. We also have the rise of algorithmic organizations. This would sound like a stupid question to you guys, but are you working for an artificial intelligence? Because if you're at Amazon, as well as other organizations, you are increasingly hired by the AIs. So there's a company called HireVue out of San Francisco. About 65% of the Fortune 250 actually use artificial intelligence to do the majority of the hiring. AIs are also doing the firing. They're also on artificial intelligence boards, and they're increasingly people's managers. So Amazon actually got taken to court, so did Uber, because within Amazon, there's an AI that will do the hiring. It will then monitor you in the warehouse. Now, on the one hand, this is good, because if I'm picking up goods like this, it will say, Matt, you're picking up the goods wrong, you're going to end up with a bad bag. So it's now giving me advice, which is something we'll talk about later. However, if I don't hit my productivity quotas, Amazon's artificial intelligence will automatically fire you. Uber's artificial intelligence automatically fired drivers that didn't get the highest ratings. Both of these companies were taken to court in Europe recently, and both of them lost. In Asia, there is a company that has 40,000 people. It's a gig economy company that's being managed by AI. When we look at Twitter, Jack Dorsey, and he's not alone in this, wanted to turn Twitter into a protocol. So you take it from being a traditional hierarchical business to being a protocol. We also have the concept of temporal organizations as well. So I create an organization on the blockchain, a decentralized autonomous organization on the blockchain. It runs for about a year. At the end of that year, it collapses itself down automatically and disperses all the assets to everybody that I want it to. We also have 15 of these. We actually have some of these on Wall Street as well as in Hong Kong. Fully autonomous hedge funds and financial services organizations. And when I say fully autonomous, there is no human involvement and there is no human oversight. So you can kind of think of these as quantitative traders on steroids. And some of the founders of these companies have said, if we die, the company will keep running. So when we talk about the future of work and everything else, basically we have to include these kinds of models. Because the future of work in a fully autonomous company for a human, not quite sure what that looks like. But I think the word fully autonomous probably gives it away. Now, when we have a look at the workplace, increasingly we kind of have this concept of, I work in a physical place. So physical work, digital work, and virtual work. Now, when we have a look at University of Oxford, as Ian was on earlier, as well as organizations like McKinsey, they say up to 50% of all of today's jobs are partially or fully automatable. companies like Barclays and HSBC estimate that by 2030, 45% of banking jobs can be automated. But when we start talking about automation, there's different kinds. So we've got automated, which is robotic process automation and robotics. So this is where I automate your expense process. So your managers no longer need to actually click the approve expenses button, right? Typically this is kind of dumb automation. Then we have autonomous artificial intelligence. Autonomous artificial intelligence is a kind of AI that takes in data, looks at the data, and then comes up with different decisions. And over in Hong Kong, we now actually have artificial intelligences on the board, again, of several financial services companies. And if the AI disagrees with the human board, then the human board step down in terms of the AI wins. And there's been a couple of cases where the autonomous artificial intelligence decision-making systems have actually saved the companies. So when you think about self-driving cars, they make decisions. Do I go left or right? Do I avoid that person or whatever it happens to be? It's not standard dumb automation. So when we talk about autonomous stuff, it makes a difference what we're talking about. And then we have augmented. So this is where we start combining the best of humans and human skills with the best of technology. And I'll show you what that means. Now, increasingly, we have this concept we can work from anywhere. We know this. I can work from the beach. I can work from here. I can work in an office. With space-based satellite systems, I can work in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. However, organizations kind of are now grappling with this. You know, we still have offices. We want you to work 2 days in the office and 3 days out of the office. When we talk about hiring, a lot of people want flexible hiring options. There's been a backlash against coming into the office. But organizations that I work with, like Adidas, PwC, and all these, have sort of said, on the one hand, when we're trying to hire people, they want us to offer them completely flexible working that lets them work from anywhere at any time. But we now have a culture hit, because if all of your teams come into the building at completely different times, you never have those water cooler moments, right? You never have sit-downs like this, because you're all in different places. So what we're seeing is the culture of organizations being radically affected when flexible working is actually implemented. So this is sort of where organizations are now saying, well, we want you to come in to work on Monday and Tuesday so you can be with your team and have a cultural experience. But then a lot of the new hires are saying, well, that's not flexible working. So you end up in this kind of dilemma, you know, push me, pull you. Now with Accenture sort of came up with this solution. They have onboarded over 150,000 people in virtual reality, and they created this. It's called the 11th floor. It's a virtual reality space where everyone can actually come together to have those cultural water cooler moments. Because at Accenture, they've given everyone a virtual reality headset. So this is sort of when you have a look at some of the solutions to culture hits, these are some of the, I won't say answers, but these are some of the experiments that people are doing to try to figure out, you know, how do you enable truly flexible working while not eliminating the company's culture? We also have this kind of concept as well of you can work anywhere. So we're not talking work from anywhere. I'm talking work anywhere. So when we start talking about the kinds of jobs that we can do remotely, if you're in finance, can you do your job remotely? Yeah. If you're in sales, yeah, right? If you're a surgeon, can you do your job remotely? If you're in construction, could you build a building on a different continent remotely while you're in here? Technology lets us do new things in new ways. So when we have a look at things like virtual reality, at what point will your companies say, we're not giving you a laptop any longer? We're going to give you a pair of virtual reality glasses, not headsets. So these are already coming through from companies like Meta, Panasonic, HTC, and so on and so forth. So what happens basically when you can get into a virtual reality office space in front of all of your computer monitors and everything else just by putting on some glasses? These glasses incorporate cameras and everything else, so we don't need the Quest controllers. because they can tell what your hands are doing. Okay? So when technology starts becoming easy to use and invisible, it lets us do new things in new ways. Now, a weird one is a little while ago when I was writing one of the books that I showed you, I thought I would write it in virtual reality. So I was hanging in space. This is actually the Trends Codex, and it was interesting. Yeah, it was kind of a surreal experience working in virtual reality because you can set your own worlds and everything else, which actually helps improve mental health as well, you know, because you're no longer just staring at a static monitor in front of you, basically, you know, in a flat in Putney in the UK. However, at Stanford, when we start talking about virtual reality work, we can do odd things. So I was typing my book with 2 hands. Stanford did an experiment where they gave people a third arm coming out of their chest. So it's a virtual arm. And people said it was really difficult to get used to. But when I started getting used to how to control this third arm coming out of my chest, they found that, funnily enough, productivity increased 30%. So when we start talking about working in virtual reality, forget the physical confines of your own body, you know? But then as we start talking about, you know, the surgeons, increasingly using robotics, 5G, and immersive reality technologies, I could be on stage here and operating on people in South Africa. So this actually helps avoid over 17 million deaths. So new technologies can do a lot of good. But here we are.
We had a young woman with an acute heart attack. The total transfer time to get her to our hospital was 3 hours. There's a feeling of helplessness as a physician that you know what the treatment is to limit their chance of death, but you can't get to them.
Our hypothesis is that if we implement remote robotics in its full capacity, we will change the lives for hundreds of thousands of patients in the US and millions around the world.
Using technologies like 5G networks and robotic systems to provide cardiac care at a distance and be able to do telestenting has the potential to change the landscape of medicine. 5G technology really opens up the possibility to do these over longer distances with minimal delays in signal and transmitting greater amounts of data.
Being able to reach a patient hundreds of miles away to deliver the care they need when they need it is one of the most disruptive things happening in the medical industry.
So when we talk about construction, I could be in a drone operating rig on stage here and using immersive reality technology. So we'll talk virtual reality, but it doesn't have to be VR. I can control drone machines, and we have controlled drone machines in South Korea that are building buildings in South Korea and clearing sites. So when we talk about being able to work remotely, you can all work remotely, you know that. But a lot of the industries and a lot of the jobs that we've never thought that we could actually decentralize, we are decentralizing. And there's a lot of benefit in that. But we also need a cultural change to go, well, do I let my surgeons work from home while operating on patients doing neurosurgery in Mumbai? Which has already happened, by the way. We can also work with anyone. So one of the things that we kind of lose with Zoom, for example, is this closeness to one another. You know, it's like I was chatting, we were chatting earlier, weren't you? Look, you've actually got a body. That's it. Yeah. So when we're sort of used to interacting with our colleagues' heads. That's it. No idea, basically, what the rest of you actually looks like and everything else. But this is where, when we start having a look at technologies like Microsoft HoloLens and Microsoft Mesh, as well as Meta, because Meta are now doing some interesting things with what they call Second Life codecs, we can actually digitize physical presence. So what if you could actually be working here, but still feel that your colleague, who might be thousands of miles away, is standing right next to you? Those technologies, courtesy of artificial intelligence, are now starting to come through.
Is a spark that gives our lives meaning. It drives us to seek out others who feel the same way.
Okay, why don't you input the data and we'll take a look together. Hey Mari, what you got for me?
To find those who share our views, yet offer different perspectives.
Look over here.
Challenge us with new ways of seeing.
That I think we should.
Deepen our understanding. and enrich our lives.
最后一笔的时候，往前
Great things happen when we commit to something bigger than ourselves.
Let's take a closer look at it.
Place this here. Let's see how we go from there, okay?
This sense of collaboration and the feelings of connection it brings excites us.
Hey, just in time. I'm gonna move it slightly, okay?
It's yours, take it.
We have 2 planes right now on the same trajectory.
As we put people first, technology fades into the background and feels like anything but.
Aisha, what do you think?
I think if we had 330, maintaining 2800, we'll be clear for approach.
Excellent.
This changes the way we see the world, and in turn, changes the world we see.
These numbers are looking great, actually.
There's promise in the possibilities, and what we see and create next will stretch the imagination.
Good morning, Sarah.
Morning.
Slowly coming towards the thumb.
A world without boundaries.
Good job. A lot better than yesterday.
Yeah.
Excellent. Slowly bring the
A
arm
world
down.
where technology enhances, not limits, humanity. With people front, center, and in the spotlight. The future is here. And here can be anywhere. Introducing Microsoft Mesh.
So what happens to corporate culture, basically, when you are all thousands of miles away from each other, but can actually still have that presence, that feeling that the person that you are talking to is actually full-bodied and behind and beside you? We can also work with anything. So this is increasingly where we break down a variety of different human to technology barriers.
Today, we're all being disrupted. And I'm not just talking about by digital humans like myself with our conversational artificial intelligence, state-of-the-art high-def rendering, and neural networks for brains.
So that's Anna. That's it. She's one of my employees. She's not human. She's a digital human with a neural network brain. And if you want to interact with her, basically then she can have a conversation with you about whatever you actually want. Because essentially she's an artificial intelligence with a face. Now in the financial services community, she has a couple of friends. There is one that is now selling mortgages. If you have an account with NatWest in the UK, you can ask her inquiries about your bank accounts, loans, mortgages, holidays, all that kind of different stuff. And the conversations that you have with her are using natural language processing, which means that the conversations you have, she will respond to in a lifelike way using the correct grammar and everything else. She will even change her moods, accents, as well as emotions, depending on your own particular moods, emotions, and accents, and so on and so forth. So this is the digitization of human presence at internet scale, as some of these organizations. So she's from a company called Synthesia. However, there are other organizations like Soul Machines, Samsung have some as well, and so on and so forth coming through. So increasingly, are you actually going to be working with human colleagues, or are you actually going to be expected to tag team with digital humans? And what impact does Anna have on diversity and inclusion in your organization? Because she can be any culture. That's it. You know, if I wanted to bump my organization's D&I scores up, you know, and suddenly I need to hire a lot of women, for example, I say, well, that's fine, you know, done. Okay? So believe it or not, when I have conversations about diversity and inclusion, what are your policies around digital humans? You know, if you get a bad D&I score, you just go, that's fine, I've just changed half our workforce, basically to women. Yeah, or to men, or to people of this age, or, you know, from this background, or whatever it happens to be. Now, when we start talking about the importance of being able to collaborate with technology, gets us into some interesting areas. So there is a trend. It was up there for a quarter of a millisecond. I don't know if you saw it or not. It's called the centaur principle. Now, when you read the newspapers are always going to say, artificial intelligence is coming to take your job and kick you to the curb. You're welcome. And then we all get really depressed, right? However, we also know that technology has actually benefited us all anyway, because what does Google do? Google, the only thing that Google does is give you access to all of the world's information in about half a millisecond, right? Now think basically what your lives would look like if you didn't have access to Google. Right? So are you better or worse for Google? Google Maps, where the local restaurants and everything else. So having access to all the world's information benefits you at an individual level, a professional level, as well as at a business level. So the centaur principle was coined by Gary Kasparov. Now, we've had a couple of people who've been beaten by AIs. They are world experts. Gary Kasparov is one of the world's greatest chess players. We had Sundong Ling, who is the champion Go player out of South Korea. Both of them, and they're not the exception any longer, are world leaders in their field, top experts, but they were smashed by AI. So in the game of Go, as well as chess, artificial intelligence took them to town. Wasn't even a competition. So the press basically went to the Go player and said, you know, you must be really gutted that you've been beaten by artificial intelligence, and actually just completely trounced. And after the games, he went, yeah, and frankly, I'm retiring because AI is unbeatable, right? 3 months later, basically, they went back to him and they said, look, you know, you've got to be really gutted that you got beaten by AI. You know, we're just wondering, doing a follow-up, you know, what are you doing now? And he said, well, actually, I'm playing again. I'm playing Go. And they said, well, that's a surprise, you know. And he said, well, I actually had the opportunity to think about it. There was this one move called Move 37, if you've heard of it. There was one move in this game that everybody, all the world's top Go player experts, thought that this move was a mistake. It turned out to be the most brilliant move of the entire game and the entire series. And he said, we had this move 37. The artificial intelligence showed me a new way to play the game, showed me a new strategy. So now I'm an even better player than I was before. Same with Gary Kasparov. So what happens when you start tag teaming the best of humans and human skills with technology that has essentially access to infinite data and all these kinds of different things? So this is where increasingly AIs are helping us do new things. Now, we're all used to this sort of two brains, you know, one's in our pocket. But what happens when you can talk to AI?
Hey, Watson. Question for you.
Sure.
How are you different than artificial intelligence?
I share some elements with artificial intelligence, but there are key differences.
Like what?
I'm working to help people think better and make more informed decisions. Cognitive computing is about augmenting human intelligence, not replacing it.
So you're not trying to think for me?
No.
What's my favorite color?
I have no idea.
Favorite food?
Nope.
Do I prefer cats or dogs?
Cats?
Wrong. Neither. Trick question, Watson.
So the important thing here is the conversational interface, because we've talked here about accelerating future growth, right? Now, all of your businesses will have data scientists. You have huge volumes of data and everything else. And I've sort of listened to the panels and the sessions, and people have said, so over the next couple of years, basically, we want to be more present in this market. You know, we want to be going after these kind of acquirers or whatever it happens to be, or merchants. Now, in order to get to the point, if I say, okay, in these countries, who are you targeting? To get to that point where you say, well, we're targeting these 10 companies, you'll have had to have crunched huge amounts of data and all that kind of stuff, right? That would have probably taken a couple of days, a couple of people, a couple of data scientists, et cetera, and then they had a chat with you and you went through it all. What if you can just ask the artificial intelligence and you say to the AI, we want to grow our footprint in Valencia in Spain. Give us the top 5 targets. Yeah? And it gives you 5 targets. But then you say, okay, I want to really understand why you gave me those 5 targets. The next piece is called explainable artificial intelligence. And it says, well, based on the existing acquirers you already have and the markets that you're going after and the markets that you're strong in, you know, as well as weak in, as well as basically, you know, the ones your competitors are going after and everything else, and based on big data information that we see about these particular acquirers, we actually think these 5 are the ones to go after. Has that helped you? Or has that hindered you? So when we start augmenting ourselves with technology, we are much more efficient than just being replaced. You lose a huge amount of lose a huge amount of human capital if you just say, I'm replacing you with a dumb RPA system. Now, this is where we start getting into another field called artificial intelligence coaches, which on the one hand is actually quite hilarious, because there are now artificial intelligences that are helping you become a better human. Now, we've done a couple of surveys. So this was with radiologists. Now, when we combined the best artificial intelligences with the best radiologists, they identified 36% more cancers earlier than ever before. But this 36% uplift in productivity and in results is over radiologists acting alone, just doing it themselves, but also the best AIs doing it alone. So this is a 36% productivity and results uplift of what happens when you tag team an artificial intelligence and a human radiologist together. It's kind of the first of its study, but that's why I wanted to put it up, because it actually starts helping us quantify some of these things. Now, we actually have a variety of different artificial intelligences. There's one called Falcon AI. It smashes human gamers. Bearing in mind, esports is a massive game, is a massive business now. It's hundreds of billions of dollars. It's about $360 billion. So we have AIs like Falcon AI that are teaching human esports gamers better strategy so they can be better esports gamers. Trying to say all that in one sentence. Over in the US, we have Mutual Life, which might say something about their customer services, but we have a couple of insurance companies over in the US where the AIs are now listening in on customer services calls, and the AIs are saying, right, this person's starting to sound a little bit aggravated. So as the human who's taking this call, I suggest you slow down, drop your tone, pause. Yeah. So we actually have artificial intelligence teaching customer services clerks empathy, which I find is actually really funny. Now, we also have decision-making systems. Now, we're all using these. For example, we have auto-recommendation systems if you use Amazon and everything else. You know, we've got AIs basically saying, based on all your previous preferences and everything else, do you want this, this, or this product? Don't bother searching the other 1,000 products basically for things. So increasingly, you know, when we start talking about that previous example, when you can start talking to an artificial intelligence or talking to technology and go, I'm thinking of buying a car. You know, now you know my background. I've got a family, but I kind of like sporty cars and everything else. What do you think I should actually be looking at? And then when we have a look at sort of the financial services space, whether it's quantitative traders, basically whether it's wealth advisors and so on and so forth, yeah, with RBS, basically we've seen that tag teaming humans basically with artificial intelligences, and it's not always AI, but you know, we've actually increased returns basically by 64%. So while the media will continue to focus on this AI's taking your job, reframe it. What happens when you're able to interact with technology in a natural way that means that you are even better? You can get more done. You become more insightful, more knowledgeable, more skillful, more valuable to your organizations. And that's it from me. And I'm going to stop working myself now. So yeah, thank you.